You were out of practice all week, Brady. What'd you see?
Well, first thing, I mean, look, I always sort of say, and not that this makes for the best radio, I always say, like, you kind of got to be careful with what you see during this time of the year because it's not totally real football. It's more real than it was a couple weeks ago now that they're doing 7-on-7, 11-on-11, but it's still not real in the sense that they're not in pads. They're not, hitting each other. They're not even, like, contesting, defensive backs aren't all the way contesting plays. So a lot of times this year you see kind of like pass catchers pop, and part of the reason is because defensive backs aren't, playing the ball the way that they would in a more real football setting. But so football aside, I think the first thing that stands out is just the attendance and how many people were there. And, Jonathan Hankins, he was the one guy over those first the first 5 practices. Yesterday was number 6. That was not there, and he was there yesterday. So don't really know what was going on with him, whether that was just simply a personal choice or what. But with Hankins there yesterday, everybody on the roster was there for at least one of the 6 OTAs, and for the most part, like most players were there for all of them. There's just a couple guys here and there. So, and remember, these are voluntary, and typically, at least in years past, you've seen a handful of guys just not show up to any of them, and they would show up for the mandatory portion. And so, to me, the bigger picture takeaway here is, and I think this is sort of by design here, like this is a team that I think there's going to be a little less individualism on this team. And that was something that Pete Carroll, I don't know if he welcomed it, but he sort of accepted it, knowing that, when you let players be themselves, you're a lot of times going to get the best out of them. That also comes at a cost. And there was a lot of drama that they've dealt with over the last few years. And I think that they are very much enjoying not having as much drama. I think they've been drama-free when it comes to, they don't have any sort of contract disputes going on right now. They have, I think, just less individualism, with some guys that are no longer on the team. And, I think that, comes into play when you start talking about moves they could make. And Jalen Ramsey is a guy who comes to mind. Yeah, he would definitely help their cornerback room. He would be an upgrade over what they've got. But that's also a guy who has not really been, you wouldn't really call him low maintenance. And I think there's been some drama with him. And that just comes to mind when you think about kind of the vibe that they've got going on right now. The money is one thing with Jalen Ramsey, but there's also kind of that idea that this is a guy who might kind of disrupt some of the drama-free environment that I think they're really enjoying right now.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And till some idiot, radio host brought the drama to their building on Tuesday, everything was free and clear. And then, this radio host went on, and if you listen to someone like, Rich Eisen, it sounds like they created a whole narrative about how Sam Darnold was never going to start. I don't think that's exactly what happened, but what did you see from the quarterbacks?
Sam Darnold.
All right.
Not Sam Darnold. Yeah, he was fine. There were a couple interceptions. I think that, every interception, there's a story behind it. And those 2 that he threw, Tuesday?
Monday.
I think that Monday. No, whatever it was. I think you've got to keep in mind,
Tuesday.
There's really bad interceptions, and then there's interceptions where a defensive back just makes a really nice play. And I think that was the case on both of those. Those weren't interceptions where you go back and look at those and say, my goodness, how did he not see that linebacker? How did he not see that safety sitting right there? Those were nice plays. And, I think this is the time of the year where guys are just kind of figuring things out, figuring out the offense, figuring out the receivers that they're throwing to. And so, you are going to see some mistakes this time of the year. And so I think, I don't think you asked the question based on that performance. You asked it just based on the idea that they've got 2 other quarterbacks and all that. So, I thought the question was understandable. I just think some people reacted, to kind of the reports that, we were making from that OT. I mean, yeah, when a guy throws a couple interceptions, you just sort of, you write what you saw, and that was the observation. And I just think some people who weren't there saw that and took it and ran with it and said, oh, my gosh, Sam Darnold had a disastrous day, just the way people kind of take things and run with them. these days, you know.
So what do you think? Brock and I were kind of debating this earlier. Actually, we weren't even really debating. We kind of ended up agreeing on a number. But if I asked you to put percentages on the chances this year that Sam Darnold is A, as good as he was last year, B, as bad as he was in Carolina and in New York, and C, somewhere in between, like okay, good, not great, kind of middle of the pack kind of a guy. What do you think if you had to divide like an 100% chart up? What would you divide that up as?
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough to be. I mean, obviously you would want him to be as good as he was last year, at least as good as he was for those first 16 games in Minnesota. He doesn't have the same kind of receivers that he was throwing to then. And he doesn't have the same offensive mind in Kevin O'Connell. And that's no slight on, Clint Kubiak, but you know that it was a great pairing there, and we still have to see what the pairing is like. And obviously they have worked together, and, that was probably part of the reason why the Seahawks were as sold on pivoting to Darnold as they were, and maybe part of the reason why Darnold was, saw Seattle as a good destination was because of that Clint Kubiak connection. Mm-hmm. It's just, how good it was last season with Kevin O'Connell and Sam Darnold, and you just don't know what the pairing is going to be like here. So I think, that would be the goal. I just don't know if that's any sort of automatic thing that you can count on as him being as good as he was last year. I think he's going to be better than he was with the Jets, just because with the Jets, I think you've got to take into account, just the organizational dysfunction there. And I have got to imagine that contributed quite a bit to the struggles early in his career. And when you take into account the fact that, he's a talented guy, he's probably not in most drafts like number 2 overall pick talented. And he probably got overdrafted, and he got overdrafted into a city where there's a ton of pressure. And, so you throw in all those factors, and it makes sense why he struggled, the way he did in New York. I think he was better in Carolina. Remember, when he finally got into the starting role that season there, he went 4-2, I think, over his final 6 starts. And so he just didn't really see it enough over a full season to think that, this is really the guy that, that was drafted number 2 overall. So, and then he did what he did last season in Minnesota. So I think he's a much better quarterback than he was in New York, than he seemed to be in New York. But again, a lot of things went right for him last season in Minnesota, and you're sort of, if you're expecting him to have that same level of success, you're banking on a lot of things going the right way.
So what I hear from you, the number that Brock and I kind of threw out and agreed on was like 30% chance he's as good as he was last year, 20% he's as bad as he had been before, 50% they're somewhere in the middle. And I'm hearing for you that maybe the 30 and 20 are both too high, that those numbers should both probably be lower, and that there's a better than 50% chance that he's kind of somewhere in the middle. Okay, fine. Let's say he is in the middle. What does that look like over the course of a season?
I think that looks, I mean, I would say, probably, I think your numbers are probably right. Maybe not quite 30, but certainly lower than 20 that he's, that he is what he was in New York. What does it look like over the course of a season? It's hard to say. I just think that when you talk about like Sam Darnold versus Geno Smith, I think, Mike, that if you were to take that coaching staff, that scouting staff across the street to the bar over there, across 405, and get them in an honest conversation, I think they would tell you that Sam Darnold's a really good quarterback, even though he's not quite as talented as Geno Smith. I think they would tell you that Geno Smith is a more talented thrower of the ball, and that the reasons they thought he's a better option for them went beyond that. It's about the fact that he's younger. It's about the fact that he was going to be a little bit cheaper. And I think they would tell you that they think he's going to be a better leader than Geno Smith was. And I wouldn't discount like the degree to which that was a factor in their decision to pivot away from Geno Smith and to go to Sam Darnold is the leadership stuff. And I know people will kind of cringe hearing that, but I really think that was a factor here, that some of the challenges with Geno were his temperament and the way that he carried himself and the way that he sort of interacted with teammates. And I think that they will tell you that, look, nobody knows how it's going to go on the field. But I think the people who are in the building who know Sam Darnold have vouched for the idea that, yeah, this guy's a good leader. He's going to relate to his teammates. He's going to handle adversity well. And but how's it going to go when they get on the field? I mean, I think it's a leap of faith that they're taking there, For
sure. Yeah. Talking to Brady Henderson, let's move away from the quarterback spot for a moment. Abe Lucas spoke to the media, I think it was Wednesday after practice, and I thought this was a pretty powerful comment he made about the change in the offensive identity.
I mean, we're just more so when you get a new staff in, everybody wants to run the ball. But when it kind of, you come in and it's kind of a non-negotiable, we're running the ball, we put a fullback in the backfield, we're changing it up. We're doing things differently. It's like an old school mentality with a new school principle sort of thing. So yeah, definitely just looking forward to getting after that.
What did you take from that specifically from Abe Lucas?
You know what, Mike, the comment that I think got me, that really interested me more so was one, I think he said it right after that. It was the next thing he said, where he was talking about how they're going to be really good at only a few things.
I have that too. Let me play it for you. Here's a little more from Abe.
I would just say, or I guess I'll put it like this, we're trying to be elite at very few things, but those few things are, what the offense is going to be based around, and that's the run game. We're going to be elite at the run game. That's the philosophy with it. So, it's not some, hodgepodge of just a bunch of different stuff we're just throwing in, We're going to be elite at the basics and make sure that they work so we can do it against anybody.
You buying all that?
Yeah, I think that was a fascinating quote. And, he didn't name, last year's offense and the coordinator by name, but to me, what it sounded like he was talking about there was, last year, there wasn't really an identity of the offense. And it seemed to me, I always sort of wondered if this was just a collection of plays that they really liked that didn't really fit into an overall system. And that's the one thing about the Shanahan system and all the offshoots of it is it's very much a system where there are no standalone plays that the coordinator just really likes. It's every play is connected in some way to every other play, and that every play sort of complements everything. Everything plays off of each other, and it is a true system in that sense with pretty specific goals and principles and all that. And so that's sort of, to me, I've always kind of wondered if Ryan Grubb's offense was the opposite of that, where it was really just, I think Abe Lucas kind of used the word there, if it was really just a hodgepodge of kind of plays and ideas that they liked that didn't really have that weren't really all that connected, and I think that is probably the big difference between, the offense, like Kyle Shanahan's system and the guys who run offshoots of it is it's very much a system. And so that's, to me, that was kind of came to mind when he was talking about that. And, I think in terms of the run game, there's a difference, like you said there, every coordinator talks about wanting to run the ball. I think some coordinators talk about wanting to run the ball just to kind of balance out their pass game. And that's not the case. This is an offense that wants to run the ball to run it because their whole offense is based off of that. And so, he's talking about, wanting to be elite there and really it sounds like have the offense based off of that, not just have a running game that exists solely to bring balance to the pass game.
Looking at the offensive line, left tackle set, right tackle set. I assume in Gray Zabel, left guard is set. What do the other two positions look like so far?
Well, I asked Clint Kubiak this the other day. I said, where does the competition stand at right guard? And he said, there are 5 practices in, and he said, quote, it's wide open, brother. I thought that was B-R-O-T-H-A, not brother. It was brother.
For sure.
Which I thought was a great answer. I don't know if you liked the question, but I did like the answer. But yeah, really the two guys we've seen there right now have been, I think, mostly Christian Haynes. And keep in mind, we've only seen 3 of the 6 OTAs, but it looks like it's mostly been Christian Haynes there with some Anthony Bradford mixed in. I think Bradford has more so been with the 2s, but he's got some work with the 1s. And then the other competition, if it is that, which I think it is at center with, Oluwatimi getting most of the reps there, and then Jalen Sundell working in with the starters when he's not with the second team. So I would imagine that you're going to see, I mean, if Clint Kubiak is saying it's wide open, brother, then I think there was probably more than two people ultimately that they're going to, give a chance to compete for that job. And I would think that you're going to see Setao Laumea at some point work his way into that competition. He's mostly been backing up Zabel at left guard. And I wonder, depending on how Bryce Cable do, their 6th-round pick develops, I wonder if he'll get a shot at that guard spot. But so right now it's been Christian Haynes and Bradford. I got a feeling it's going to be a little more wide open than that. But those are the two spots that right now seem to be up for grabs.
Who's your money on?
I don't know. I mean, I don't want to discount Bradford. I just think that, if Ray Roberts is listening, his eyes might roll when he hears this. But I just logically, I don't know if he's the greatest fit for the kind of just as a bigger Mauler type guy. I don't know if Bradford is the greatest fit for what they want to do zone-wise and like getting, guys out in space. He spent the 3rd-round pick on Christian Haynes last year, and so I think they're going to give him every opportunity to win the job. But that said, Setao Laumea has done it. I mean, he finished last season and started the final 6 games there. So I would think that it would be between, assuming they don't bring in another guy, I would think it would be between Laumea and Haynes. And I don't know. I would not discount Laumea, just considering that, you've seen him do it at, I wouldn't say a high level, but you saw him play competently there over those final 6 games.
All right, so almost all of this conversation has been about the offense. Let's shift gears because, again, the strength of this team really should be the defense. And asked you about it last week. I'll ask it again. Some of your cohorts there at ESPN had little hypotheticals. What would you give up? What would you have to give up for Trey Hendrickson? And I don't know, it was like a 2nd-round pick, a 2nd and a 5th next year, a 2nd and a 7th, maybe a player. None of them were all that much. It wasn't much more than you gave up for Leonard Williams. Any chance that the Seahawks get involved in something like that?
Well, okay. I think when you're talking about the Seahawks and possibly trading for a disgruntled player who wants a new contract, you always have to keep in mind the pretty well-established history with moves that they've made like that, where, not since Percy Harvin have they traded for a guy and given him a new contract right away. Look at every guy that they've traded for, whether it was, Jimmy Graham, Dwayne Brown, Sheldon Richardson, Jadeveon Clowney,
Jamal Adams,
even Leonard Williams.
But God, they've done it a lot.
Guys, yeah, right. But not one of those guys, a lot of those guys were traded because they were in contract disputes with their previous teams, and not one of those guys did the Seahawks give a new contract to right away. Some of those guys never got new contracts from Seattle, but the ones who didn't get it until they had at least played with the Seahawks for a little bit, whether it was a half season, with Leonard Williams.
So there's precedent.
But there is precedent for, if this were to happen with Trey Henderson, that would be a case where they acquire him and they are able to convince him that, look, that's just not something that they do. So you're going to have to play out the final year of this deal.
But they've done that like 7 times.
Right, but that impacts what you're willing to give up. You know what I mean? Like if you're only getting a guy for a guaranteed 1 season,
well, would you give up what you gave up for Leonard Williams just a year or 2 ago? I mean, like he's just as good a player as Leonard Williams. He's around the same age. I mean, like you wouldn't give up roughly what you gave up for Leonard Williams and try to go down the same road that you have before with all those other guys?
Yeah, he was. Well, he's a little older than Leonard Williams. He also, the Williams one was a little different situation. Just remember, part of the reason the Seahawks gave up the 2nd-round pick for him was because they got New York to take on most of the remaining salary. So there was a trade-off there. That was also half a season, so it's kind of tough to compare that one apples to apples. I would say 3rd-round pick, just knowing that he isn't, he is 30, 31 years old.
He's 30. He'll play this year at 30.
That's right. And again, if you're not going to give him a new contract, that means you might lose it. This might only be a 1-year rental. So for that reason, I don't know if I would give up the 2nd-round pick, assuming you also are taking on the full $16 million in remaining salary. a second-round pick would probably be a little too rich, but I would say, that conversation kind of starts at a third-rounder. To me, that would seem fair when you consider that, you're not giving the guy a new deal, so you aren't going to get him. You aren't guaranteed to have him for more than 1 year. You're paying the $16 million, and you're getting a guy who's 30 years old. Yeah, I don't know if, I think more than a third-round pick would be kind of high.
One of the, I would give up a second rounder just for the record. I'm like, if you're willing to give up a third, I'm willing to give up a second. Like, get this guy here. He's that good. He makes you elite. He changes the whole way your defense functions, I think. He gives you an elite pass rusher, which you've lacked here forever. But anyway,
I'd like to negotiate trades with you. If that's your logic, I would.
I want to make the deal happen.
GM and you were a GM.
I want to make the deal happen.
Negotiate with
yeah,
you.
I want to make the deal happen. I want to make it happen. Like, I'd rather give up a third. I'm not saying I'd start the bidding at a second, but I want to make it happen. And if I have a chance to get an elite player and the difference is, a third versus a second, at some point I'm going to say, screw it. Yeah, I'll pull the trigger because I want this guy on my team.
Yeah, fair enough.
I think you are too. I think you would too. I think you would start and say a third.
I would say, all right, if you're going to give up a second, why don't you give up the first? Come on, Mike.
No, because I started at a third. I'm not going to come all the way down to a first-round pick. That'd be a lot. But, the difference between a second and a third, it's a legitimate difference. I'm not saying it's not. But I think that even you, Brady, once you got into the negotiation, if I really held firm, hey, you want Trey Hendrickson, it's a second-round pick. You'd be like, all right, fine, give me back a fifth or sixth or something to balance it out. And they say sure, because everybody wants to make the deal done. And then it works. So, hey, good stuff, buddy.
You're right.
I am right. Thank you.
Yeah, and that is how trades get balanced out. Is okay. Well, I'll give you that second, but you got to give me something back to kind of soften that blow. And what else happens is teams kind of feel pressure when they start negotiating a trade. And I think this kind of happened with Jamal Adams a few years ago when they start negotiating trades with another team, and the word gets leaked out. Then then the fan base gets kind of worked up into a frenzy, and they get really excited. And then all of a sudden there is pressure on the team to get that deal done. And so, okay. You're not crazy. I'm just teasing you.
All right. Well, I've been told I ask crazy questions every once in a while, so it's worth pointing out. Thank you, Brady. Good stuff as always. Good to see you where you play.